如果你在聆听时不需要频繁暂停，就能理解大意，那么你的英语积累在日常表达中是完全够用的。我们开始吧。
He froze at the line painted on the dusty floor, because one step, just one, could change everything. People in the crowd leaned forward. They wanted to see if he would do it. The hall was hot. The air felt thick. Sweat rolled down his back as he looked at the thin white line on the wooden boards. It looked simple. It looked harmless. But it wasn't. Not tonight. He wasn't the first person to stand there, and he wouldn't be the last. But every time someone stood at that spot, something old woke up in the room. Something strict. Something heavy. The line had been painted there decades ago. People had forgotten who drew it. But everyone knew the rule tied to it. You stepped up to the line. You placed your toes right on it. Not behind it. Not over it. Right on it. And when you did, you agreed to follow the rules of the place. No excuses. No tricks. No escape. Some said the rule came from the old Navy ships long ago. Others whispered it came from schools, from strict teachers who made kids stand straight in front of their desks. But the truth was older. Older than any ship. Older than any school. Long before the phrase became a thing grown-ups threw around, something like, "You better toe the line," it was a moment like this. A room. A crowd. A line. A person who had to decide what to do. He heard the voice of the old captain in his head. The captain had told him, when your toes touch that line, your word becomes iron. He wasn't sure he believed it then. Tonight, he did. But the real reason he hesitated wasn't the rule. It was what came after the rule. People expected him to follow, to obey, to fall in with the group. Toe the line. Stay in order. Stay in shape. Stay in control. Don't push. Don't bend. Don't break the pattern. And he wondered, did he want that? A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone coughed. Someone whispered, "Is he scared?" He wasn't scared. Or maybe he was. But fear wasn't the loudest thing inside him. The loudest thing was a question he never asked out loud. What if the line wasn't meant to trap you? What if it was meant to test you? He placed his foot forward. Slowly. Dust lifted from the floor. The room held its breath. His toes hovered inches above the line. Just a little more. Just a little closer. A memory flashed in his mind, stories he heard as a kid about sailors standing on deck at dawn, a row of boots touching a rope on the floor while the captain checked if every man was awake and ready. The sailors said the rope wasn't the real test. The test was whether you could stand still when everything inside you wanted to run. He took a breath, and his toes touched the line. The sound in the room cracked like dry wood. Gasps. Whispers. A few cheers. But something else rose too, something in him. Not fear. Not pride. Something sharper. Because the moment his toes touched the line, he understood something no one had ever explained. Toe the line didn't just mean obey. It meant meet the demand. Face the rule. Stand where you're asked to stand, even when it feels hard. The floor vibrated faintly under his shoes. Maybe it was the crowd shifting. Maybe it was just his heartbeat. But it felt like the story behind the phrase was waking up again, like he had stepped into a long line of people before him, people who stood straight, people who stayed steady, people who held their place when they were called to. He lifted his chin. The room grew quiet again. The test wasn't over. He could feel that. This was only the start. The line felt warm under his toes now, as if stories were hidden inside the paint and the wood. Stories of people who stood here long before him. People who faced the same pull, the pull to step back and the pull to step forward. A man near the front whispered, "Watch his shoulders." Another said, "They always shake the first time." He tried not to listen. He tried to keep his breath steady. But the room had a way of pushing itself into his mind. A girl in the back leaned against the wall. She looked bored, but her eyes stayed on him. She had stood at the line last year. She knew the feeling. She knew the weight. She had told him once, "The line looks thin, but it cuts deep." He didn't understand then. Now he did. The captain's voice came back to him again. "Toe the line isn't about perfection," the old man had said. "It's about intention. It's about showing that you're present, even when everything in you wants to drift." Presence. That word hit him harder than any rule. The crowd expected him to show discipline, to show respect, to show order. But presence, that was different. That was personal. He looked down at the line again. It was so thin. So plain. Just a stripe of faded white paint. And yet it felt like it held every rule he had ever followed, every promise he had ever made, every time he had stood in a doorway trying to decide whether to walk in or walk away. For a moment he felt young again. Standing on a porch at dusk while his father told him the story of the sailors. His father spoke softly, like the story had slept in his chest for years. "They lined up at dawn," his father said. "The deck cold, the air sharp. Every toe on that rope meant, I am ready. I am here." Not perfect. Just here. He hadn't understood the beauty of that little detail until now. He straightened his back. Not because the crowd wanted him to. Not because the rule demanded it. Because something inside him clicked into place. A ripple passed through the room. People shifted. People watched. Some waited for him to break. Some hoped he would stand steady. Some didn't care at all, they just wanted the story to move. But none of them felt what he felt. The line wasn't holding him. It was steadying him. He heard footsteps. Slow. Measured. The kind of steps that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. The keeper of the hall walked forward. Her boots tapped on the wood. Tap. 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 She stopped a few inches in front of him. Her shadow covered part of the line. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at him, as if checking the shape of his decision. You know what comes next? She asked quietly. He nodded. He had heard the stories. When you toe the line, you aren't finished. You're claiming your place in the test. You're agreeing to step into something larger than your own fear. She leaned in a little. Most people think the line is the test, she said. It isn't. The test is what you do after it. His heartbeat kicked harder, but he didn't move. She pointed behind him. A long wooden board lay on the ground. Another line waited at the far end. Thicker. Darker. Sharper. He felt the shift in the room. This was the first small reveal. The first turn. So the line wasn't an end. It was a beginning. He swallowed hard. The keeper stepped aside. The crowd parted. The path between the two lines stretched open like a quiet dare. A tightness formed in his chest. Not fear this time. Something else. Something like readiness. He stepped forward. His toe lifted off the first line. The room let out a low murmur, like breath slipping through old walls. One step. Then another. The wooden floor creaked under him. The second line waited. Darker. Stronger. As if it had held more stories, more fights, more choices. As he walked toward it, he understood something. Every person who had ever used the phrase "toe the line" had stepped into a moment like this. A moment when the rule wasn't just a rule, it was a mirror. And he was about to see what it would show him. The second line pulled at him long before he reached it. It felt heavier in the air. As if the wood itself remembered the weight of every person who had stood there before him. He slowed down. Not because he wanted to stall, but because something inside him told him this part mattered. The space between the two lines was a passage. A bridge. A place where you could hear your own thoughts too clearly. He heard footsteps behind him. Not from the keeper. Not from the crowd. Just the soft echo of his own walk, bouncing off the old walls. It made him feel like two versions of himself were moving, the one walking forward, and the one trying to keep up. He glanced to his left. The girl from the back wall had moved closer. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. But she watched him like she already knew the next beat of the story. She whispered, just loud enough for him to catch it, that second line, it doesn't test your body. It tests your direction. He kept walking. The keeper didn't follow. The crowd didn't move. Only the space moved, stretching gently as he stepped through it. He felt memories rise, one after another. Times he backed away from things. Times he stood his ground. Times he wished he had tried harder. Times he wished he had walked away sooner. The second line grew clearer. Thicker paint. Darker edges. Not faded like the first one. Someone in the crowd muttered, "He's slowing down." Another replied, "They all slow down here." He didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the dark line waiting for him. The floorboards creaked under his next step. Then again under the next one. Each sound felt like a countdown. Halfway there, he felt something shift. A small, sharp voice inside him. A question he didn't want. What if the first line was easy because it had nothing to demand from you? What if the second line asks for something real? He stopped walking. Just for a breath. The air tightened around him. The girl's voice came again, softer this time. No one reaches the second line without facing something. Keep going. The keeper stayed silent, watching, almost like she was measuring the space between his hesitation and his courage. He took a breath and moved again. When his foot lifted, he felt lighter. When it landed, he felt heavier. Like every step was a small choice, and each choice stacked on the last. The second line finally sat a few inches ahead of him. Close enough to touch. Close enough to fear. He stared at it. How could a simple line of paint feel like a door he wasn't sure he wanted to open? The room leaned in. Everyone felt the moment shift. This wasn't like the first test. This was the point where people revealed themselves. A man near the front whispered, "This is where most turn back." Someone else answered, "If he turns back now, it'll echo for years." He placed his foot forward. Slowly. The air around him thinned. His toes hovered over the dark paint. Not touching. Just close. Another memory crashed through him, a night when he almost quit, almost walked away from something he cared about. He remembered how that choice haunted him. How the absence of a step can feel heavier than the step itself. He exhaled, and he let his toes drop onto the second line. The hall reacted like a living thing. The floor hummed. The walls breathed. A low gasp rolled through the crowd, rising like a sudden wind. The keeper stepped forward now. Her shadow stretched long behind her. "You crossed the distance," she said. Her words weren't loud, but they hit hard. "Now you face the measure." He didn't know what the measure meant. But the second his toes pressed into the line, he felt something shift inside him. Not fear. Not pride. Something like a quiet settling. The keeper nodded slowly, as if she could see the change. "As long as people stand on this line," she said, "the story keeps living." He felt the truth of that. The line wasn't just a rule. It wasn't just tradition. It was a place where people chose to show themselves, clear, steady, present. And he understood something deeper. Toe the line didn't come from obedience alone. It came from the moment a person decides not to run. He lifted his head. The room went silent again. The second test had begun. For a long moment he didn't move. The second line felt solid under his toes, almost like stone. Not cold, just firm. A firmness that said, "You're here now." No drifting. No hiding. The keeper stood in front of him, her hands behind her back. The crowd pressed silently toward the edges of the hall, leaving a wide open space around him. A strange calm settled over the room, the kind that comes just before something important breaks open. The keeper spoke quietly. "This is where the old sailors stood when the captain checked their readiness. Not at the rope. Not on the deck. Right here, at the point where a man chooses to be counted." He felt that. He felt the weight of the idea more than the words. People weren't asked to be perfect. They were asked to show up, fully. The keeper raised her hand. "Now," she said, "the measure begins." She didn't shout. She didn't explain. She simply stepped aside. And something deep in the hall seemed to shift with her movement. A low groan rolled through the wooden beams. The air cooled. The light dimmed a little, like clouds had moved across the sun outside. A new sound rose behind him, the sound of slow, heavy steps. Not many. Just one pair. Steady. Rhythmic. Each step landing like a soft drumbeat. He didn't turn around. He knew he wasn't supposed to. The girl who had watched him earlier whispered, "That's the one who reads you." Her voice was tight, almost respectful. The reader. He had heard the stories, someone who watched your stance, your breath, the set of your shoulders, the shape of your silence. Not judging you for weakness. Just seeing you as you were. The steps stopped right behind him. Close enough that he could feel the shift in the air. A voice spoke, deep, quiet, steady. "Do you carry fear?" His throat tightened. He didn't know the right answer. He didn't think there was one. He said softly, "Yes." The reader didn't move. Didn't breathe loud enough to hear. Then, "Do you carry pride?" He swallowed. "A little." The crowd leaned forward. This was the part they came for, not the lines, not the walk, but the moment a person stripped down to who they really were. The reader spoke again. "Do you carry truth?" He hesitated. Truth felt harder than fear. Harder than pride. Truth meant stepping out of every shadow inside him. Finally he said, "I try." The reader stepped around him, slow and silent, then stood in front of him. He was older than the keeper. Eyes sharp but steady. A face folded by years, not anger. "Trying is enough," the reader said. "For now." A hush moved through the hall. No one dared cough. No one dared shift their weight. The reader lowered his head slightly, as though honoring something inside the boy, something quiet but real. Then he asked the question that mattered more than any other. "Are you willing to stand where you are, even when the world around you pushes?" The boy didn't answer right away. His chest rose. Fell. Rose again. He thought of all the times he had stepped back to make things easier. All the times he turned away because staying was harder. All the times he wished he had held his place just a little longer. The weight of the second line felt different now. Not heavy. Anchoring. He lifted his head. "I am." The reader studied him for a few breaths. Not doubting him. Measuring him. Then the reader stepped back. A single slow step. The keeper nodded once. The girl in the crowd exhaled as if she had been holding her breath the entire time. The reader's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Then you have touched the meaning." The boy didn't fully understand yet. But he felt something shift inside him, a quiet setting, a settling into place, like a small stone clicking into the center of a ring. The keeper approached him again. "Most people think toe the line means follow the rules," she said. "But the old meaning is deeper. It means show who you are when the line is drawn. He felt those words land. The keeper stepped aside once more. "There is one last part," she said. "And it belongs only to you." The hall grew still. Every whisper stopped. Every breath tightened. The final test waited. And he knew it would reveal more than any line could hold. The hall felt different now. Not hostile. Not warm. Just expectant. Like every board in the floor leaned forward with the crowd, waiting to see what he would choose. He stood on the dark line, breathing slow, steady. His toes pressed into the paint. His heels held the weight of everything he had carried to this room. The keeper didn't speak. The reader didn't speak. Even the girl stayed still, her eyes locked on him as if she knew the next few seconds mattered more than the entire walk between the lines. He felt the quiet settle on his shoulders like a cloak. A thin one. A light one. But one he could feel. The keeper finally broke the silence. "This last part," she said, "is older than anyone here. Older than the hall. Older than the paint. Older than the phrase itself." He swallowed. "You stand on the second line," she continued, "not to show obedience. Not to show strength. You stand to choose." He felt the truth in that. The line didn't demand perfection. It demanded intention. The reader stepped forward again, but only half a step. Just enough for his voice to reach the boy without touching him. "What do you stand for?" the reader asked. The boy's breath hitched. That was it. The last test wasn't about fear or pride or readiness. It was about the thing inside him he never said aloud. He had no script. No rule book. No guide. He closed his eyes for a moment. He saw flashes, a promise he once broke, a friend he once helped, a quiet morning when he tried again after failing, a night he walked home wishing he had fought harder, a memory of his father telling him that standing still can be braver than swinging a fist. When he opened his eyes, the room felt sharper. The air cleaner. The line steadier. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. "I stand," he said, "for trying again." The crowd didn't move. Not a shift, not a whisper. He went on, breath shaking but voice steady. "I stand for not running when something matters. Even when I'm tired. Even when I'm scared. Even when I don't know if I'm enough." A soft sound moved through the hall, not applause, not cheering, more like a long exhale shared by 100 people at once. The keeper lowered her head. Not in judgment. In recognition. The reader stepped back fully now, giving the moment space to breathe. "That," the reader said, is the heart of the line. The boy felt warmth rise through him. Not pride. Something cleaner. Something like the truth catching light inside his chest. He expected the test to end there. Expected the keeper to tell him he passed. Expected the crowd to shift, break, release. But instead the keeper raised her hand one last time. "You chose your meaning," she said. "Now you anchor it." He frowned slightly. Anchor it? How? The keeper pointed to the space directly behind him, the long passage he had walked, the thin line where he began, the entrance of the hall beyond it. "You walk back," she said. "Not as the one who entered, but as the one who chose." The boy looked over his shoulder. The wooden boards stretched behind him, worn and old. The thin white line waited at the far end like a memory he hadn't touched in years. Walking back suddenly felt harder than walking forward. He faced the keeper again. "Is there a rule for how to walk it?" "No," she said. "Just walk it as the person who spoke those words." That was the challenge. Not the first line. Not the second line. But the walk between them after the choice was made. He took a shaky breath. His toes lifted off the second line. The paint released him gently, as if letting go of a hand it had held. He turned. The hall felt longer now. Quieter. More honest. His first step back felt like stepping into a new version of himself. Not louder. Not stronger. Just clearer. The crowd watched every inch. The keeper stood tall. The reader folded his hands behind him. The girl smiled, only a little, but enough to let him know she understood. He kept walking, slower than before, but steadier. Each plank under his feet carried a small echo. Not fear. Not doubt. Just presence. The thin white line grew closer. When he reached it, he stopped. The hall went still again. He placed his toes gently on the faded paint, just like he did at the start. But this time the line felt different. Lighter. Like it wasn't holding him in place, it was opening a door. And as he stood there, he realized something simple: this wasn't about rules at all. It was about returning to where you started, as someone who knows why they stand. The hall seemed to breathe with him as he stood again on the thin white line. Not the first moment. Not the second. Just this one, quiet, steady, full. He didn't feel the weight he felt before. He didn't feel the eyes of the crowd pressing on him. He just felt the ground under his feet, the familiar paint, and the echo of the person he had been when he first stepped here. The keeper walked toward him, slow and sure. Her boots clicked softly on the old boards. She stopped a few steps away, her expression calm and warm in a way he hadn't noticed earlier. "You came back," she said. Her voice held no surprise, just understanding. He nodded. "You didn't return as someone finished," she continued. "No one ever does. You returned as someone willing." He felt those words settle deep inside him. Willing. Not perfect. Not polished. Just willing. The reader stepped forward now, joining her. His voice was softer than before. "People think toe the line means follow the rule. But the old sailors knew something else. You toe the line to show you're ready to begin, not ready to end. Ready to begin." The idea felt larger than the hall, larger than the story, larger than the moment. The girl in the crowd cupped her hands around her mouth and called gently, "Tell him what happens next." The keeper smiled a little. Not a big smile. Just enough to light her eyes. "What happens next," she said, "is simple. You carry the line with you." He frowned slightly. "How?" "By standing where you need to stand," the keeper said. "Not where it's easy. Not where it's safe. Where it matters." The reader added, "And by returning when you drift." The boy felt the truth of that sink into him, the truth no one had spoken before now. Toe the line wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about control. It wasn't even about discipline. It was about presence. About stepping into the moment that asks something of you. About holding your place long enough to see who you really are. The keeper touched 2 fingers to her forehead, then to her chest, a small gesture, a quiet blessing. "The hall is finished with you," she said. "But you are not finished with the line." He bowed his head slightly. Not out of duty. Out of gratitude. He stepped back from the line. Just a few inches. The space felt different now. Not a distance. Not a gap. Just breath. The crowd parted slowly, letting him walk through. Some nodded. Some smiled. Some simply watched him pass, knowing he had crossed something they could feel even if they couldn't name it. When he reached the doorway, he stopped and looked back. The lines waited on the floor, thin white, dark thick. Still. Quiet. Holding the stories of everyone who had ever stood there. He realized something then. The hall wasn't magic. The lines weren't magic. The tests weren't magic. The magic was the choice. His choice. He stepped out into the bright air. The door closed gently behind him. The world stretched wide, loud, moving, full of things that would pull him, push him, distract him, challenge him. But he felt steady in a way he hadn't before. He knew now that towing the line didn't belong to old ships, or old hulls, or old stories. It lived in every moment when a person decides not to run from themselves. And maybe, he thought as he took his first step onto the open street, maybe the real test isn't standing on the line. Maybe the real test is living what you chose when you stood there.
作为一个母语非英语的人，能把故事听完，你的进步太大了。感谢你收看这个节目。如果你觉得这个节目对你有帮助，请给我一个点赞，或者留下评论，这对我很重要。我们下个视频见。